It's a thrill to be here with all of you and to get a chance to tell you and share my thoughts on how we can take blockchain forward to the next level. First, a little dip into the archives, just to give some background context. In the 80s, I published an article that showed how to send messages over a packet switch network so that no one could tell who was sending messages to whom. And as you know, the internet is such a packet switch network, and this remains pretty much the only known solution that's practical to provide privacy of traffic analysis online today. But about the same time that appeared, I'm not saying there's a correlation, but perhaps the head of the National Security Agency, United States, started personally writing letters to scientific organizations, threatening them with draconian legal consequences if they were to continue to hold the planned sessions and conferences on the subject of cryptography. And so being a graduate student at Berkeley who had worked on this and realized that cryptography is really the only way that individuals can protect themselves in cyberspace, I felt it was incumbent upon me to do something about research in this field. And so I secretly sent out a bunch of letters, invited people to come to a conference, secretly set up an international organization with officers and everything. And then I appeared at this event where most of the people in the field were assembled, and as the general chairman, I announced where the bathrooms were, what time lunch was, and so forth. And then I said, by the way, you as a result of having paid your $100 or whatever it was registration fee, you are all now members of the International Association for Cryptologic Research. And our next conference will be in Italy in the spring and so forth. Now the whole front row was occupied by well-dressed people who listed themselves as having no affiliation, no university, no company, but mysteriously, even though this event was in California, their addresses were all in Maryland. So it was a great pleasure for me to look at them all assembled there and see them all turn green. Because that was it. It was over. There was no way to stop public research in cryptography. Later, they thought, well, the National Institute of Standards should promulgate standards for public use of encryption technology. And this would be adopted by all industry globally. And of course, if you wanted your stuff to be bought by government, it would have to conform. And so this immediately became a dominant thing. And by the way, the National Security Agency would help out the National Institute of Standards in this noble project. So I didn't think this sounded too good, so I went to the European Union and I asked them for a bunch of dough, and eventually they gave it to me, and I ran for 5 years this project, which was an open academic evaluation and development of cryptographic algorithms, and many of them are still used today, even in Bitcoin. So the next thing that happened was that I came up with this scheme to allow organizations and banks and governments and so on to run the infrastructure, but to allow consumers to hold the keys that would protect their own privacy. And so this was invited to a bunch of scientific journals, and eventually Scientific American published it, and I decided that in order to push this new idea forward, you see, it's a kind of a hybrid scheme where people would hold keys on what I called card computers. It looked just like cell phones, mobile phones today, smartphones, like even with the leather wallets and everything. And then the companies and banks and so forth would do all the heavy infrastructure and heavy lifting, but those keys that you held would protect your privacy. So it was a kind of a shared setup. The scope was beyond just payments. It also included a lot of other things, but in order to drive this forward and make it actually happen, I launched this company, DigiCash, and the idea was to take the most attractive, sort of low-hanging fruit, the aspect that could be pushed forward most directly, which was payments, and get that in people's hands as soon as practical, with the theory that people would then want to use this type of technology to protect all kinds of other things once they got a flavor of this strong protection of their own privacy through their own keys. And so initially, we launched Cyberbucks as a airdropped currency, you'd call it today. So remember, in the early 80s, I invented the notion of electronic money, a number that is worth money, a digital bearer instrument, and I instantiated that in what I called eCash, a blind signature-based approach that allowed the user to maintain privacy unconditionally, even against quantum computing and infinite computing, but that left the rest of the infrastructure to banks. So we initially issued the Cyberbucks to anyone who wanted to open a shop online. And if you go to my website, Chaum.com, and look at the eCash project, you click on these and you can see the original home pages of all the shops that accepted eCash back in the day. But then we had also banks, like Deutsche Bank was the largest bank in Europe. They issued eCash, denominated as Deutschmarks in those days. So it was a fiat-backed eCash, and similarly we had a US bank, an Australian bank, we had dollars in several flavors, and also a bunch of Asian licensees, and so on. But things being what they are, you know, the rest of the banking world didn't sort of rise to the occasion and think, this is really what consumers want, we're going to offer this more and more. No, they just kind of abandoned this really good approach, and there's a little bit more of a backstory there, but not for good reason. So we went back to the good old proven thing, like remember in the Nazi era, right? Your papers, please, right? So everyone nowadays is conditioned to identify themselves to organizations. At every instant, you are required to show your ID, prove that you have something, you know something, or some physical attribute of yourself, or some combination of these as a condition for participation in society. This is not the vision that I had. So I think we can do better, and so I've got a new vision. And ironically, it uses these same three aspects, but it used them in a different way. So we still need to use something that you know, something that you have, something about you, but Now, you can generate all your own keys. And so you can use these keys to keep confidential all of your communication. Not only the message content, but who you communicate with and when. Similarly, you can use it to not only control your electronic currency, but all the digital assets that might be controlled exclusively by you with the possession of your secret keys. And finally, people have additional attributes about themselves, like, say, earned degrees and medical records and all kinds of information associated with themselves. And for those, they should also be able to have the unique, exclusive control over them using keys that they generate themselves. I think this is what's really wanted and needed, and now we know that it's possible to do it, and I don't think we should accept less. So the question again becomes, well, great, this is a wonderful paradigm. How can we actually make this happen? And once again, I think the thing to do is to look for the thin edge of the wedge. Try to find out what is the low-hanging fruit, what is the thing that will allow us to break through and put this sort of approach in place so that it can naturally grow and reach its potential. So I would like to posit that there are 4 key requirements that need to all be satisfied in order to achieve a global payment system. I'm not talking about store of value. I'm talking about a payment system, something that will rival the visas and all the other payment and messaging platforms that are out there. Because, you know, if you think about it, payments is intimately related to messaging. Right? You can send a message just by encoding part of the message in the amount of payment. So you don't need a separate messaging system. You can use a payment system to send messages, and similarly, if you want to build a secure and privacy-protecting payment system, you need a secure and privacy-protecting messaging system to send the payment messages on. So those two are sort of inextricably intermingled, and so what we'll need is a way to deliver payments and messaging that has the kind of performance that consumers have come to expect or more or less demand. With the mobile phone platform, you can send messages, receive payments, and so forth with a latency of like 10 seconds from initiation of payment to the final consummation of payment, from sending a message until when it's received. So we'll need to be able to match that latency. Okay. The second necessary condition is that we'll, if this is at all successful, we'll need to have a relatively high transaction volume. You know how many payments are made electronically globally every year? According to published sources, about 500 billion. That's 1 per person per week, roughly speaking. That's a lot of transactions. And so if you want to do this on the blockchain, you can't afford like huge data centers to do it like Visa has. Each node has to be able to participate in this process. So we need to find a way to let a single server class node do soon 100,000 transactions a second and be able to scale to an actually considerably larger number. So there's a third requirement, which is what I call true privacy. So, there's really two aspects to privacy. One is your IP address, your identity, your smartphone's MAC address linked to your payment or not? A lot of people were disappointed when they found their Bitcoin payments were linked to their IP addresses. So that's one issue. But there's another issue, which is, are these transactions linked together? Okay? If you don't solve both of those problems, you don't have privacy in payments. Or messaging, for that matter. And largely, the industry, this is not widely acknowledged and discussed, but you don't really have all the privacy that you think if you're using, government-approved encryption algorithms over networks where it's not that hard to see who's talking to whom and which messages and transactions are linked. But if we want to really take this to the next level, we need to solve all three of these issues simultaneously. And I would submit to you, just like there's no battery as big as this gizmo that could power a car for a week, these are fundamental physical problems. You're not going to be able to solve these problems just by rearranging known cryptographic techniques, the kind of stuff that's used on the blockchain today. This is going to take some real fundamental breakthroughs, and you would be fooling yourself if you believed otherwise. The systems that offer some modicum of privacy really fall down in these regards, but even still, there are no systems that really have end-to-end finality at scale like that. You hear a lot of inflated performance statistics and claims, but if you really look into it, I'm afraid you'll find, unfortunately, today these three are not at all easily met. But there's a fourth one, and here I would say that government has dropped the ball. They've been driving us all crazy with their wanting to trace everything that we do and ensure that only good people can use, and all this stuff about identification and all this. Well, but anyone can circumvent this stuff too, and they do all the time. So it's largely ineffective, but they are asleep at the switch. The real issue is, are these systems stable against catastrophic risk? Could someone come up with a cryptanalytic attack that would break the global payment system? Are we relying on some unproven new kinds of encryption techniques, or could a quantum computer actually devastate all of these systems and basically ruin all of the ability for consumers to engage in commerce? So this would cause tremendous social disruption. So let me thank you for your attention, and hope you all have a wonderful time here.
Chaum, ladies and gentlemen.